Hello, everyone. All right, welcome to the third live event of SC4x Supply Chain Technology and Systems. Firstly, I have to admit I am very jet lagged and I very much apologize for the multiple emails you received this morning. I mixed up the time and the link, and so I just have to apologize for flooding your email. I just wanted to make sure you had the right information. So again, first, just want to start off with that. So hopefully you're not too annoyed with me for sending multiple emails, but hopefully that also means that you're here and you get to hang out with us. So this is sort of a more general session than we've had in the past couple sessions. It will be a general wrap up of the course. So I have Mr. Connor Makowski with here. As you guys, you've met him several times, and you know he's one of our key colleagues on a MIT digital engineer. He helps with all kinds of things. So he's going to help me recap the course from weeks 1 to 4, and also discuss the Fresh Connection, and then I'll be talking about the latter weeks. And in this point, you know, we're going to have our breakout rooms where we're going to do something a little different. Instead of posing questions to you, we want you to tell us what you've learned in this course and how you're applying it in your everyday work. And we really feel like this is the really interesting stuff, and these kind of anecdotes really drive our work. So as we're talking, you know, just brainstorm some things that possibly you plan to use or you're already using, and that's what we'll do in the breakout sessions. So first, just as sort of a recap of who is in this course. So we ended up right around 11,190 students total in supply chain SC4x this time. We have 917 verified students. So you guys are part of that cohort of students. This is only the second time that this course has ever been run. So this is, you know, some of it's all new material, and you guys are experimenting right along with us. So we're so grateful to have you. The median learner age is 30 years old, so a young crowd here. And the top countries represented are the United States, India, Canada, and Brazil. Canada actually moved into the third spot. Brazil is generally in our third spot. So I thought that was an interesting switch up for this course. There's over 168 countries represented, which is always super amazing to me, and it's such a cool thing to have such a global population with us. And 22.8% of you are female. So while that seems low, you know, supply chain is generally very heavy male dominated. So I'm really happy to see almost a quarter being female, and hoping we're driving that percentage up. So you ladies out there, you know, get out and tell the other ladies how good this course is and how central supply chain is, as you already know. And the last little note is, you know, we're going to have sort of an open-ended Q&A breakout session this time. But one thing I would like you to save your questions on the comprehensive final exam. So as we've kind of been sending out some notes, there will be a session on the comprehensive final exam next Monday. So I will absolutely double, you know, write the right time. So that will actually be at 1600 UTC on December 11th. And that will be myself, Alexis Bateman, and Dr. Eva Ponce, the executive director of the program. And what we'll be doing is really just giving an overview of the final exam, how you're going to get enrolled, as we actually will be manually enrolling you, because we have to make sure that everyone's passed the course, as well as requirements, what you can have during the exam, how it's really going to run. So if you have any questions about the comprehensive final exam, please save those for next week. And you can, of course, there's the help email, cfxhelp@mit.edu. So if you have kind of questions in between then, or you can't make to the live event, please, you know, use that email as well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Connor Makowski. So he's our, you guys know him very well, so I don't know if he needs more introduction, but he's been very key to this course. So he's going to do a little bit of a review of the first weeks that you guys went through, and hopefully you can recap and remember back to those early weeks. All right. Thanks, Connor.
All right. Hey, guys. It's nice to be here today. I really appreciate the introduction, Alexis, and I really appreciate everything you've got going on. All right, so I'm going to start with a recap of the course. I'm just going to start with week 0, and I'm going to move all the way through week 4. And then I'm going to let Alexis take back over, and then she'll go for the rest of the course. So in week 0, we actually did a lot of like course introduction stuff. This is also where we introduced the Fresh Connection. So the Fresh Connection is a game that we actually didn't have as much participation as we had hoped. And this is a game that I know some of you have played, but some of you have not. So I'm going to quickly go over what that is. The Fresh Connection is a global simulation game. It's played online. There's a login. You go into this platform and you can play the game. Now, as part of this, we cover all aspects of supply chain management. In this, we cover purchasing, operations, supply chain, and sales. So you start with purchasing. You'll choose your suppliers. You'll choose how much you're going to pay them. You're going to choose the different levels of service that they'll give you, and that's all negotiated. And then you then have them ship those things to you. They come into your warehouse, and so your supply chain person, or your supply chain part of the game, you would decide how much inventory to have in that inbound warehouse, and also how much inventory to have in an outbound warehouse after production happens. And then in the middle, you've got this operations role that you'll be playing. And in that, you'll actually be deciding, how often to produce, how much to produce of different products. In this game, it's a juice game, and so you're choosing how much to produce of these juices. And then at the end, you go back into this outbound warehouse and you go into sales. And your salesman contracts with different customers, what products to offer them, how much of those products to offer, and the different levels of service that you give to those customers, as well as other timing restrictions. And so this is a very, very interesting game that actually ties in everything we've learned in all of our courses. I would highly recommend that in the next run of SC4x, you come back and you just play the game if you haven't had a chance to do that so far. So that was week 0. Week 1, we covered data modeling. And so we started with relational tables, attributes, those types of things. We worked into standardization, data integrity. We covered relationships and enterprise resource diagrams, as well as keys, like primary and foreign keys, how we can tie these tables together. And so the idea is we would kind of build this foundation up, build a common vocabulary, and then we would work you into more advanced parts of database management, like in week 1, lesson 2, normalization. We covered different standardization of that, normalization. And essentially that just allows a lot more modularity and efficiency. It can allow you to keep data structures longer, and then also do a bunch of other things. In this, we covered 1st through 5th normal form, and we covered different aspects of that. Now, each one of them have different kind of performance levels. It actually slows down your performance as you go, but it saves the amount of space that you're going to have in your servers. And so in doing all of this, we kind of discuss the trade-offs of that. And that kind of is something that we discuss later on. And at the same time, we also discuss client-server architecture. And so how do we tie all of this together, and what does this mean for a database? And we discuss in week 2 how we move into these, how we get information out of a database once it's set up. And so this, we have how to create and remove databases, how to create and remove tables, columns, primary and foreign keys, and even add data to that function there. And so in doing this, we can then move into pulling data out from that database so we can answer some questions. So we answered all sorts of different business questions. For example, what is the name of some guy in state J? And so we can pull these different data insights out from our database using different queries. And then we move into some different database extras. We talk about the connections between databases, how to optimize databases or even set up data warehouses, and then the benefits of using the cloud. We also discuss data cleaning and how you can clean data and what that means for your databases. And then we kind of tie this right in directly to machine learning. This is where most of the database systems are moving today. It's how do we not only just collect this data, but what do we do with it? And so we discuss machine learning in general, a lot of general terms. And we start with a higher level of that. And so we start, what is machine learning? And when do we use it? And what does it mean to use that machine learning? We also talk about types of machine learning, like supervised and unsupervised learning, as well as how to use different learning mechanisms to make inferences about our data. So then we get into the nitty-gritty in week 4, and we start with dimensionality reduction. So we talk about principal component analysis and how we reduce dimensions that way, what it means to reduce those dimensions, and how also we might lose a little bit of data depending on how many of those dimensions we keep, but we can also keep all of our data structures. We also talk about unsupervised classification. So specifically, we discussed k-means clustering and how we can classify data using different clustering algorithms. So that way we can look at it and we can garner insights even if it hasn't been labeled before. We also look at supervised learning, which is, once again, we have the data labeled, and then how do we predict future labels of data we haven't seen before? And we can then use all sorts of different techniques to estimate how well we'll do predicting this data in the future. And so in that, we learned about decision trees, k-nearest neighbors, and random forests, I think, as well as naive Bayes. And we discussed what it means to measure that using cross-validation, folds. We also discussed how we measure sensitivity and specificity, what that means for our models, and how we can use that better in the future. And then at the end, we connect all of the dots together. We dive into the transaction data, and we use queries to explore the data. We then use different machine learning techniques and data visualization techniques to view and garner insights from that data, which then gives us a really good kind of tie around for everything that we did in the first half of the course. Now, at the end of all of that, essentially what we do is we have a midterm exam and then we go into the next part of the course. I don't want you to think that that's not connected. The next part of the course is all of these different systems that have everything like this built in. This is the foundational aspect of what the next part of the course will cover. And so I'm going to pass it on to Alexis so she can cover those next larger parts of the course, those different systems that we use.
Perfect. Great. Thanks so much, Connor. That was a great recap for the first 4 weeks. And I know that you know, those weeks were really an eye opener for some of you. Some of you obviously work with big data all the time and are able, you know, data management systems. But I know that you know, having that in a supply chain perspective was incredibly useful. So then after week 1 through 4, as you guys remember, we had the midterm, which was average of 84%, amazing average, 95% pass rate. So it seemed like you guys really got the concepts. We were really pleased to see how well you were grasping all that information. So as we moved on from the midterm, we kind of took that to the next level. So then, you know, you have sort of these data management skill set, and then we moved into some of the areas that I think many of you work with every day. So looking at sort of the supply chain software system. So those, you know, as we've talked about throughout these series of courses, there's really 3 flows in supply chains, right? So you have information, material, and money, essentially. And so what we've touched on probably the least at this point is really how you're managing that information. So the week 1 through 4 started with that, and then we continued into sort of now the systems that so often manage those. So we looked at them from a variety of different perspectives. So we classify supply chain IT systems into really 3 main ways. You know, there's really enterprise resource planning, ERPs, as many of you I'm sure work with on the very daily basis. Then there's a little bit more supply chain planning systems that are really doing some of the forecast and planning. And then there are really the supply chain execution systems. So that's things like transportation and warehouse management. And they really are more about executing and carrying out the movement of product. So enterprise resource systems are really kind of the centralized database for much of a business's information, you know, and it has a lot of pros and cons, but it has a few core functions. So, you know, there's really the customer management component, manufacturing, procurement, logistics, product data, finance, asset management, and human resources. So of course, different ERP systems are set up in different ways, and that can be not necessarily comprehensive. There may be offshoots of other systems that come together to support that bigger ERP system. There's also 3 main kind of data sources that go into ERP systems. This would obviously be organization data. So that's really the structure of the enterprise, you know, how your business is set up. Others are masters data, which are entities like customers and vendors. And then transaction data really is the outcome of executing process steps. So, and within ERP, there's different forms of communication, as we talked about, which was really, you know, there's the business to business, so transactions between manufacturers, wholesalers, retailers. Then there's really the business to consumer, so transaction between firms and consumers such as ourselves, and accelerating and validating B2B and B2C transactions. So this is really then, you know, trying to accelerate that communication between the business to business and business to communication interchange. So, you know, and then we really got into sort of how that information exchange works. So electronic data interchange, EDI, and how really the computer-to-computer interchange of messages takes place, the time period, the restrictions, the challenges. And we ended really week 7 with the value of ERP for SCM. So that can be, you know, reducing the impact of bullwhip effect, right? So as we've learned out sort of the whole course is the challenge of the bullwhip of limited communication, challenge of planning. So then having these ERP and communication systems enabling more transparency and visibility and planning capabilities, and then also allowing a lot of analytics. So having that core data repository, being able to use that to plan and to forecast, that is another capability. And then we moved more firmly into the supply chain systems or supply chain models. So kind of looking at the difference between, planning and execution software packages. And so this can, some of these are really based around timelines. So if you have advanced planning systems, you're thinking a little bit further out. The time period's a little bit longer. And if you're, the execution systems, we really talked about two different execution systems. So we talked about the TMS, Transportation Management Systems, which I know many of you are quite experts in and we use daily, and how that really guides the transportation management, really planning, creating shipments from orders, executing, selecting and tender to carriers, monitoring, and reconciling. So actually auditing the invoices and paying for transportation. And then we went into the warehouse management system, so WMS. So this, it could include different components, whether that was, automatic identification technologies, whether that's barcodes, scanners, RFID, smart cards, things of that. Also communication technologies, so radio frequency data communications and the like, and also automated material handling technologies, so carousels, robotics, all of those likes. And we got into some of those type of even more advanced technologies in week 10, obviously. So then, we also walk through a lot of in each of these, really the software components, what they handle, so order processing, receiving, putting away, picking, shipping. So that's really innate to a WMS system. And then we also went through manufacturing execution systems. So each of these have their, their strengths and weaknesses and applications in different sectors. In week 8, we got into supply chain visibility. So, we have these various supply chain systems, and, in the perfect world, they would all work very clearly together and communicate very clearly across and also provide us upstream visibility. But as we all know in the real world, that doesn't always necessarily happen. So many companies these days are really seeking more visibility across the supply chain to further reduce things like the bullwhip effect, risk management, uncertainties. So in week 8, Chris really walked through what visibility means. So tracking and tracing. So whether you're, tracking it down, to consumer, or you're tracing it upwards from supplier, and really, identifying different components, tracing where did it come from, where has it been, and then tracking where is it now, where will it be, when will it get there. So, differentiating between those and really the different resources you need to get that granularity of information. So, and there's a lot of different interacting components here, different technologies. So, there's kind of 3 different components: capture and translate, transmit and upload, and access and actionability. So we really walk through some of the components. So barcode and RFID for capture and translation, and then the different ways for transition and uploading, EDI, API, and GPS, and talking about the pros and cons, limitations, advances, and then obviously talking about how we access and take action on that. So, integration into existing systems, or possibly an additional supply chain platform like supply chain event management, or something like a supply chain control tower. And the remainder of that week, I dived into a case study on beef to kind of give you, I hope I didn't, gross you out with too much beef statistics, but, looking at some of the challenges and things like the food industry of recall and having limited visibility, and, really some of the risks there, and some industries are really pushing for that increased visibility, some of the challenges and opportunities there. And then the last kind of core content week, we went into more kind of the selection and implementation component. So, we walked through sort of the evolution of architecture and supply chain systems, looking at some of the advancement now, whether it be cloud computing, platform as a service, software as a service. So how companies are really selecting their platforms and integrating them into systems. So. And really, there's, kind of 4 different types of, sources to select your software systems. And that's, you can customize it internally, as some companies do, which is expensive and time consuming. There's kind of the ERP expanded system, which is sort of the bolt-ons to an ERP system. Then there's sort of these best breed solutions. So, possibly, the TMS that's really the best of breed in that sector. And then there's the best of breed platform. So, just giving you a sense, of course, this is not, end all, but some good kind of organizing factors to think about these systems. Then, once you've thought about the systems, how how do you select that vendor? What do you need? What's going to be the total cost of implementation? And then, really thinking about, how you implement this. And as I'm sure many of you have been experienced in this, it's a huge task, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of resources. So, what are the challenges of implementing different software supply chain solutions? And then we really we ended in week 10, and this is where we got to do some fun stuff. We didn't, well, I mean, I would argue, right, that everything is fun in this course, but, some of the week 10 was some kind of new technology trends. So in this week, we really got to touch on a few different things. So we got to touch on things like additive manufacturing, autonomous vehicles, robotics, augmented reality. And so it was a really nice kind of week where you just kind of saw some things that are impacting supply chains, and also hopefully you were able to do some of the polls, or you'll be able to do the polls on what you see is coming down the line, whether it be mobile computing, crowdsourcing, delivery drones, and blockchain. Of course, a huge buzz around each of these things, and that we did it sort of in a continuum in some sense on what is sort of already pretty well adopted. So whether that's obviously something like additive manufacturing to something that's more very early days, something like blockchain. So we got a series of experts that really gave some insight here, and then also some discussion and around it. And of course, we want to see what you guys take away, or you see as active professionals in the field. So that was sort of the latter half of the course, covered a lot of material and things that I think are very core to some your activities. Just as before I hand it back over to Connor to wrap up the Fresh Connection, we really as we get to the final exam, so next Wednesday at 1500 UTC, the final exam will release. So we'll cover all the weeks with the exception of week 10. So you won't have any material on the technology trends. That's more for just kind of thinking about things coming down the line. So it will really be on weeks 1 through 4 and 7 through 9. So that'll release next week. So, all right, well, thanks. And I'll hand it over to Connor to further wrap up the Fresh Connection.
All right, guys. So we're going to wrap up the Fresh Connection right now. So I'm going to start by going through the winners of the Fresh Connection, and then maybe a couple special mentions, and then I'm going to address some of the questions about the Fresh Connection that you currently have. So we'll start with the third place overall winner for the Fresh Connection, and that's going to be Devoltataro with a 5.94% ROI. The username is Devoltataro. And the first name of that student is Diego. In second place is Brent M33 with a 5.98% ROI. That's a very good ROI, and that's Brent. And then in first place with a 6.25% total ROI, that's the average ROI through the whole game, is RDFI or Rashad. So congratulations to you three. You guys did an excellent job. I'd also like to acknowledge our top round played by any student through all 4 of these rounds is by Julio, and it was in round 4. He scored an ROI of 7.63%, which is very, very good for this particular game. Now, we also have some questions regarding the Fresh Connection. So Mauricio Rodriguez 70 says, really great game and experience. How can we continue playing the Fresh Connection next year on the global tournament? And so essentially that is going to be something that the Fresh Connection will contact you about. And so I will be in contact with them, making sure what's going on there, connecting some timelines. But my guess is they're going to contact you sometime next spring. So I will get with them and I will follow up with you guys after that. And then, so another question is, how can we confirm our registration for the Fresh Connection? And once again, that's going to be a follow-up email by them, and then you'll be able to register through that. And then it turns out that the results were closed after a week. That was by design. With that being said, I can post the results online, and I'll do that after this Hangout. So I will post them, I think week 11 would be a good place to post them. So I'll probably post them in week 11. We'll have like a little section saying the Fresh Connection results, and it'll probably be a CSV or an Excel sheet that'll just give all the results and then the usernames of the students that did that. So let's see, what else do we have here? There's another question about the talent connection and where we can be matched with businesses who are hiring. That's once again something that's going to be specifically done by the Fresh Connection. So I will be in contact with Hans and I will follow up with you guys on that as well. So I'm going to say back to you, Alexis, for any other follow-up and those last questions that we have. Well, it turns out Alexis is currently muted, so we're going to move into our Hangout room shortly. So the question that I want you guys to ask yourselves is, how are you currently using supply chain, things that you've learned in this class, in your job, as well as how do you plan to use it in the future? So discuss that with each other in the Hangout rooms and come back with some questions and some follow-up and even some answers for us to see how you've done that.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah. So once again, the question for the Hangout rooms is going to be, how did you use supply chain, things that you learned in this class in your current job, or how do you plan to use them in your job in the future? If you could come back in the end, we'll address some of those answers that you have and some of the questions you might have about that.
All right, we'll see you in about 15 to 20 minutes.